Good evening. This is Media Center in Ukrinform. Thank you for joining us. Let me introduce our speaker for you, Iryna Vereshchuk, Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine, the Minister on Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories. And now we will discuss how the Ministry of Reintegration is working in the time of war. Thank you. Thank you for finding time, prepared questions. Let me tell you that and you will support me. 30 minutes might not be enough, so we'll agree to stay as long as it will take to answer your questions, so you can, during my presentation, start preparing questions. I'll try to provide you with the answers, and my team will help me with that. Let me start by introducing my team so that you will understand what are the areas that our ministry is dealing with right now, and then we'll discuss the goals that we put in the first 100 days of full-fledged invasion, and now the goals for the next 100 days. So we'll watch at the short-term perspective, because we recognize that things are changing quite fast and we need to react to them adequately. So today with me here are my deputies, my team, Mr. Pavlo Kozyrev. Let's start with him, a person who deals with internally displaced persons. As you know, we have huge problem with IDPs. Their number is extremely high, and even the official figure that we're aware of does not reflect the reality. Truth be told, there are millions of people who haven't registered themselves, but actually are internally displaced persons. That's why the ministry is dealing with this work, which I would report to you later. Oleksiy Borodai, another of my deputies, who is responsible for the quick humanitarian reaction. What does it mean in practical terms? It means humanitarian corridors that, as you remember, until late May this year, they were operational. We arranged them, and this is a huge effort of a couple of dozens of people to arrange a humanitarian corridor like that. That's 24/7 tireless job of my team, along as volunteers, drivers, local authorities, and of course those people who care, who recognize that their role and place are absolutely important, and humanitarian corridors are in the priorities in what Oleksiy Borodai is doing. And in the future, in addition to humanitarian corridors, he will also be responsible, which is he doing now, the deported citizens. There might be issues involved with this topic, and we might discuss this later on. Also, would like to introduce my deputy, Mr. Anatolii Stelmakh, informational policy. We have established a Reinform state-owned agency, which is responsible for information policy, which is a tough job, because our enemy recognized that the truth that the people will hear at the temporarily occupied territories will make it impossible for the enemy to share the propaganda, all those fakes, which Russia is really rich in, and the disinformation that it's being using, constantly trying to lie to the domestic and foreign audience. I can see that there are foreign journalists today, and I will be grateful for you if you share what we're going to be discussing today to your respective countries and viewers, listeners, but most importantly, well, to your people. We expect the support of the civilization, because this is the war where the justice should prevail. International humanitarian laws should not be empty words, and we'll make sure that those rules do prevail. We recognize how difficult it would be for us to defend ourselves in the courts of law, but still there are certain ways that we're considering to have successes elsewhere, not only the front lines, because our men and women, servicemen with arms in hands, deoccupy our territory, kicking the enemy back to their land, because we haven't asked them to come here. They came with arms to sow death and violence, and they will have to be either killed or they need to leave the territory of our country. There will be no gray area here. It's black and white. It's us and the enemy should be destroyed in any means possible. That's what our army is doing. And those of us who are in the governments, we have to ensure that we save the civilians, to save our citizens, men, women, children, seniors who need to be brought to safety, and if they are displaced or become refugees abroad, they still need to always remember that there is the Ukrainian government that will always take care of them. Now let me introduce the ombudsman on persons who went missing. We didn't have legislation, as you know, and for 2 years we didn't even have the commission that will review the policies, come up with concept papers, laws and bylaws, basically helping the people to find their next of kin. So we have established such position. We came up with all the needed provisions. Thank you for the parliament to passing the law, for the cabinet ministers to pass the relevant procedures. How many people do you have working for you? 5, right? And including the ombudsman person, but we have the register of missing people. The register is something that I will talk to you some more, together with the internal Ministry of Internal Affairs and international organizations. We're looking for the ways and means to learn more about our citizens, men and women, and if possible to bring them back home alive. If we are failing, and unfortunately you're aware that sometimes we fail, at least we try to exchange the bodies. That's the function that Mr. Oleh Kotenko is doing, and I'm grateful to him for doing this, him and his team, well, all of us actually, and we'll keep working in this area in the future as well. Also, I would like to introduce to you another of my deputies, Mr. Smyrnov, Oleksandr. He is the chairperson of NIBU, Central Information Bureau that has been established recently as a response to those challenges that we faced at the beginning of the large-scale invasion in February. Initially, we planned that that will be the center of rebuilding peace. Remember, in December 2021, we made the presentation hoping that what we'll do is we will be rebuilding peace and reintegrating our territories and finding platforms for understanding, but we had to change the functionality of this platform overnight, and we created the informational bureau according to Geneva Conventions. We signed with the Red Cross agency all the needed arrangements. Mr. Alexander Smyrnov is responsible for the personnel. We are maintaining the register of the prisoners of war and the civilians who have been imprisoned. We also talk about deported people, children who have been taken out of the country, orphans, women, missing persons. So we have the fullest of all the registers, and we'll make sure that the information in this register is being analyzed, that it will bring to the decisions that would lay new policies, because we recognize that having the information, having the cooperation with international donors and organizations who have experience in forming such registries, having the ability through our organizations, NGOs, I mean, who from 2014 have their own findings. We will be able to come up with high quality registry containing all the information with analysis of all the data, and then with all the policies which as a result will bring the decisions, regulations, laws, bylaws, whatever helps the people in practical terms to find their near and dear, to wait for their husbands and wives coming back from imprisonment, from the status of prisoners of war, and children, of course. They need our attention. Mr. Kirill Dombrovsky, the state secretary, is here with us, a person who is a manager of a project. Let me explain now why I am half joking here, because our ministry is truly transformed itself. Those first 100 days of large-scale invasion caused such fundamental changes. The reality provoked the ministry in terms of how it functions. And from the ministry that you knew before and worked with, all is left from it is only the name. When you read my position now, it only kind of hurts my ears, because I know that for the time being we cannot deal with reintegration of temporarily occupied territories. We need to save people first, because in the temporarily occupied territories, well, and there are more of those territories, and we recognize what problems are there. In Kherson region, for instance, we know, or in Zaporizhia region, and it's quite obvious that the problems would not be over this month. Unfortunately, they will be present in next month as well. So we need to reformat ourselves in such a way that you will know what we're doing, that the people out there would feel that we're doing everything we could to help them out, and that the state will become stronger, and so that it will be a win-win. Here's Natalia Yemets here. Miss Natalia, where are you? She is my assistant. She works in our ministry 24/7 to bring back orphan children. So if you have questions, I will be able to respond in greater detail. But what we are doing with your help, and probably there are people here who know how difficult it is to even return one orphan back. But according to our registry, 2,121 orphans who are in Russian Federation right now. This is a huge work for us with the enemies, with those organizers of the process of bringing them home. And I'm grateful for Natalia, who opens her heart to such kids. You probably sometimes see at my Facebook, I allow myself to put this photo on so that the people will see and know that the hope is out there. Unfortunately, we cannot tell you all of the stories, and sometimes it's not needed to tell all of the stories, but it's important to know about those cases that will allow people to keep hoping, so that the people will know and be aware that we will bring everyone, a young child, an adult woman, families, households, everyone who, in violation of international laws and rules, have been forcefully brought to the territory of the enemy. They will all would be brought back. Also, Roman Karakash, who is standing here, he is the person, and those who are watching us now and unfortunately are waiting for the people from the Russian prisons. Well, he receives hundreds of phone calls every day. We're constantly open. We know exactly that it's the personal contact and the personal involvement will bring the needed results. Unfortunately, it happens so that the classical ministry, it's not what we were, and we would never be that. Previously we joked about this, but we're no longer joking. We are the Ministry of Fast Humanitarian Feedback. We had to reformat ourselves from the first days of the invasion. We had to learn how to respond to the challenges, and those challenges could be labeled as true humanitarian disaster. And we've been training and preparing ourselves. We met with the representatives of the UN, with the UNICEF, with the International Committee of Red Cross. We have come up with the plans of humanitarian reaction. We were thinking that we were ready. The UN thought that they were ready. The Red Cross thought that they were ready. And come February the 24th, we all learned that none of those people who went through Syria, through other conflicts, atrocious wars, none of them, and I'm constantly talking to them, and you can double check it, they could never even imagine what might have happened, that it's even possible when civilians are taken as hostages and are made into live shields, that the humanitarian corridors are not being opened only to destroy the civilian population. The international humanitarian law stipulates that the humanitarian corridors should be opened for sure. Out of 350 corridors that we have tried to open, only 165 were open. That is to say, half of the humanitarian corridors never opened. Why? Because Russia was violating those commitments and obligations that it undertook. Russia never delivered on what it promised to the International Committee of Red Cross. Russia was using and is still using now our civilians, women, kids, seniors, people with problems of mobility as live shield, human shield, with the aim of, firstly, to protect their own armed forces, to use what the reality that our army could not respond. Like we all know in Mariupol, you all remember this example when the hospital of intensive care in March, I clearly remember it, was occupied by terrorists. Of course, they cannot be called the armed forces of Russia. The civilians, along with the medical personnel, were brought into the hospital, and the premises were used as firing positions, and they used civilians as hostages. And there are hundreds of such examples. We who worked on humanitarian corridors are live witnesses of what was happening. How many times the enemy was explaining to us that there are no people who want to be evacuated, and people were walking out in Mariupol, Mangush, Berdyansk, Enerhodar, Melitopol. People were coming to the evacuation points and were hoping to be saved. How many times Russia has used humanitarian corridors? We have not allowed them to open them into Russia. We told International Red Cross about the fact that we don't want the Ukrainian citizens to be forcefully brought to Russia through those humanitarian corridors. But unfortunately, there are too many examples like this. We have documented all of them. Each night we were writing a letter where we reported, clearly stating each violation of the Russian Federation, of those commitments and guarantees that it gave, and violated each name of each person who was imprisoned without legal grounds for this. And in a lot of cases we managed to liberate them, but there are still people there who were, for instance, representatives of the Ministry of Emergency Situations or local authorities. They were apprehended, and we can still not be, and we failed to liberate them, and we need to keep talking about this. Also, when we come back to the work of our ministry, I would like to tell you that from day one we've been involved in with exchange of prisoners of war and everything around it. That was something that we had to do. Unfortunately, there was no laws and regulations that would regulate all that, and I had chaired the coordination headquarters back then, early March 2022, and we have come up with all the needed regulations which are currently in motion in compliance with international humanitarian law. The International Committee of Red Cross has full access to the prisoners of war from Russian Federation. They can interview them, they can escort them, participate in the exchange, etc. So we have come up with all those procedures. Running ahead of myself, let me tell you that as of today, I am no longer responsible for coordinating this coordination headquarters because it has been established at the time when we had the biggest challenges. And of course, my status as a vice prime minister allowed to arrange the cooperation between the ministries, come up with the needed regulations, and the ministry's team has been focused on that. But you have probably seen, or some of you have been witnesses of what was happening at Azovstal in Mariupol. Yeah, you all remember early May, and before that March and April, when we tried to open a humanitarian corridor from Mariupol, we were failing, and then the special operation on Azovstal became the final stage when we finally could take the civilians out of Azovstal. I was responsible for this process. President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, was keeping the special operation under his personal scrutiny, along with the UN and the International Committee on Red Cross. I would like to thank all our drivers and medics and the first responders who went into this hell. Frankly speaking, nobody believed us in the whole wide world that it's not possible. It never happened before. A humanitarian corridor is different from everything else by the fact that it goes through the temporarily occupied territory. The territories where the enemy has fire superiority, like in the case of Mariupol or Berdyansk or Mangush, as you know, this route towards Zaporizhia. For the time being, there are no our troops. Hopefully they will be there soon, but the enemy fully controls this route, and at that time they open, and that's where they open humanitarian corridors. That is to say, the dependence from the enemy, from his word, from his ability to keep and control the situation, because there were lots of situations when it was the Russian troops were not able to control the situation at the route because there were other bandits from those so-called runaway people's republics, LNR, DNR, who were apprehending people. Let me remind you that a Red Cross mission has been imprisoned at the corridor to Mariupol. They spent 1 week as prisoners, and with huge efforts of the international community, we managed to bring them back to Zaporizhia and help them. So if they do this with the Red Cross mission, ignoring the norms of the war, well, just imagine how our people were risking. That was 100% risk, but they still were doing this. So once again, thank you all. Back to Azovstal and the exchange of the prisoners. I know that these are the questions that will be asked. Let me try to explain them first myself and then enjoy some clarifications. I was answering, and I was responsible and still responsible for humanitarian issues. Such corridors are opened only for civilians and exclusively for civilians. What was happening with the military at the Azovstal, because you know that this happened, it was completely organized by our military intelligence as well as other paramilitary troops involved. That was the issue of military evacuation of the military from Azovstal was managed, and our President Zelensky mentioned this, but let me remind you, Mr. Kirilo Budanov, the chief of the military intelligence, and a team of those people who were negotiating, discussing all of the details and all of the conditions. I was not involved at those negotiations involving the military. So I was responsible for the civilians, not for the military. And now what's happening now is a process as well. I recognize that it's difficult to comprehend because people keep asking when would they bring our people back, when our wives, husbands, sons will come back. We have hundreds of women who are imprisoned. I need to say this because Russians refuse to accept that our Ukrainian service women have been, as well as civilians, have been apprehended by them. But now Russia finally confirmed that there are lots of women who've been imprisoned and we need to liberate them. So when we talk about the exchange of the prisoners, drawing a line here. I'm not involved in exchange of the military. So Kirill Budanov, the chief of the military intelligence, is responsible for this, including Azovstal. All of those military who were brought from Azovstal under the conditions that I'm not aware of. Probably sometime the military intelligence people will be able to tell us more about this, but I support them that it's not time right now to share all of the details. It's the time to deliver the results that the society is hoping for. That's why every word is very important here. I want our people to come back home. I know how their loved ones wait for them. I know how kids, mothers cried waiting for them. Yesterday was the Father's Day, and they were writing to me on social media, bring our sons to their parents, and I want all our parents and so that the sons and daughters will come back home. In addition to the military, there are civilians in prison, because according to Geneva Conventions, we can exchange the military prisoners, officer on officer contracts, soldier on contract soldier, but not the civilians. And we have more than 1,500 civilians sitting in the Russian prisons in Rostov, Kursk, in Riman prisons as military prisoners sitting there, even though they could not be qualified. They are not interned, they have no status according to the international humanitarian law, and they have to be released. That's why, grasping this opportunity that here we have journalists, foreigners, who I hope will write about this, I would ask you so that your governments and your societies will push to bring the civilians back home, because with the military we already know what's happening there, but our volunteers, activists, journalists, our priests, our local council members, mayors who are sitting in prison for 70, 80, 100 days sometimes, we should not forget about them. We need to keep talking about them, and sometimes we need to cry out loud about this, because Russia should know that this is a crime which will definitely be punished. And it's not only Putin or Shoigu or Lavrov, no, it's all the people who make such decision, who torture our people, who dehumanize them, and our intelligence shares the names of those tortures with us. And let me tell you, none of them will hide from punishment. They will be seeking for the cracks in the floor with a desire to survive. They need to recognize that, and while it's not too late, bring our people back to us and pray that our servicemen, men and women, would not then reciprocate to those enemies. So, speaking about the deported people, probably you have seen the recent resolution that has been published, if I'm not mistaken, on Friday. And it says that I became the head of the new coordination headquarters on deported people. That's the need for us, because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is doing a very important other work. There are consulates who help the deported people. There are other related ministries, internal affairs, justice, social policy. All are involved. But what we are lacking is coordination. So I decided to be such a coordinator on the deported persons. Soon enough, we will present here to you, if you invite me, all our findings, and I will explain what logic we've been using when we share those findings. We recognize that we have no time to pilot something or test some ideas theoretically first and then in the practice. No, we do it vice versa. We first try what practically could be possible to help people, and then we see what's not working, what legislation we need to rewrite, what resolution we need to rewrite so that the mechanism will start working. Because you know, in Belgorod, Voronezh, Rostov, there are lots of our people, and they've been helped exclusively by volunteers. It's difficult for us to come there. We are enemies to them, and Russia will not allow us, Ukrainians, to help our people right there. But there are international organizations. MOM, the IMO, the International Migration Organization, Red Cross, UNICEF, when it talks about kids, we appeal to them. We ask them to help us to establish such an international platform, a red hotline with numbers that a person who finds himself in such a difficult situation without money, passports, or documents that identify this person, and that person needs to somehow get out, and we need to help that person. So that's our work. These are our findings, that together with international people and volunteers, and I'm grateful to them on this, we come up with those findings. And I will be grateful to you to share your experience with us, because this is happening from scratch for us. For instance, we started helping people, and I will illustrate it with a brief example. A young guy who didn't have an ID card, but then we learned that the problem is much bigger. It's not just not having passport data on you or an ID card. As it turns out, people who are waiting for an ID card, like our usual plastic passport, there are more than 170,000 people waiting for the new passport. So when we learn the depth of the problem, we recognize that it's a technical problem that could be resolved just by passing one resolution. That's what's going to be happen tomorrow. You will see the results in 10 days time. We promise that those 170 ID cards that 170 of our citizens are waiting for, they will get them, because they will be waiting for ID for 2 months, some of them already. Thus, they could not be paid the social benefits and register themselves. So it's just one problem tied to another. Also, there are people who cannot be issued a foreign passport or driver's license because they relocated, and that's what we're doing. We collect the information about the problems. We create the steering committee that comes up with the decision that becomes the policy then. And I will be grateful to you if you are patient enough and understand that sometimes we might be lagging behind. And I would like to excuse myself straight away for those technical problems that we unfortunately failed to resolve so fast, for instance, with ID or the routes or the temporary IDs, where you can address the consulate's office and receive without waiting for 2 months for new ID. Well, if you had your passport, well, it might take days, not months. And these are the issues that we work on right now. This is what our ministry is doing. And I hope that this is something that will bring fruits in the upcoming 100 days. We will keep providing humanitarian support. We will keep doing whatever our IDPs need, because we know that these are people without employment and without the roof over their heads. So yesterday, when I had free time, I started calling to those people, and they face thousands of problems. They still live in the dormitories, best case scenario, or in the schools, in the gyms there. They have no employment. They don't know how they will what they will do in winter time, and this is a huge challenge for the government, because millions of people don't know what's going to happen to them tomorrow. And this is our job, to let them feel that they are not left on their own, that we know that it's tough for them, and we try to help them whenever we can. People need to believe that they have to stay here in Ukraine, that they, most importantly, that their kids come September could go to the schools and kindergartens. That's bomb shelters. Right now, I'm personally involved in bomb shelters. UNICEF will help us to repair some of the bomb shelters. We have selected those schools and kindergartens. Also, the program on helping people whose residences have been destroyed or damaged. So thatching the roof, putting in the smashed windows. Kyiv region, Chernigiv region is where we're starting, and thus helping people, especially destitute people, those who cannot help themselves, like retired people, a family of two, both of them are retired. The shell hits the building. What can they do? Well, again, I'm grateful to volunteers because they do much more than the government can do now. The government is not as fast and agile as they are, but we recognize that volunteers will keep working with us on the proper wording of this resolution, allowing people to feel that this winter they will be spending in their new apartments or houses. Sorry for being so fast here, but I wanted you to learn what we're doing. Now I'm ready to entertain your questions. Colleagues, use the mic and introduce yourselves, please. Hello, Olena Litvinova, Radio Liberty. Well, those registries of prisoners of war, so that you are maintaining this registry of prisoners of war. So in the list of those prisoners of war, are there citizens of Russia who were defending Mariupol and Azovstal? And if they are there, what's the mechanism of bringing them back to Ukraine? Because they are citizens of Belarus, right? And my second question, if it's okay with you, you mentioned deported people. So do you have the information how many citizens of Ukraine have been taken to Belarus? And what's the number of those Ukrainian citizens who are still at the Belarus territory? Are you negotiating with the representatives of the current authorities of Belarus to bring those Ukrainian citizens to Ukraine? Let me tell you straight away that I'm not involved in such negotiations. We have a consulate office in Belarus. Well, we have no longer have consulate office in Russia, but citizens can address them in Belarus what people are complaining about, and I know that there are lots of them, and the consulate offices have not increased its capabilities, but that should not be the answer. The answer should be increasing the possibility for people to get the documents which would allow them to move on, or even helping to buy a ticket. Sometimes people don't have even those funds. So me, myself personally, and my ministry, we are not talking to Belarus authorities because we don't believe that they are a party to deal with, because our enemy is Russia for the time being. And I believe that Mr. Lukashenko, he is just a minion of Mr. Putin, and I'm not sure that it's worth talking to this creature. Probably the Ministry of Foreign Affairs should do this, because I didn't receive the mandate to talk to him. We talk only to the Russian counterparts. How many deported in Belarus? I have no such figure. I know how many, the total figure of deported people, and it's a bit different from the one that has been provided by the Russian side. But as you understand, the Russian side never tells the truth. And in this case, they never plan to tell you the truth. They're talking about almost 2 million. Our data of our intelligence says that it's about 1.2 million, even though that's an extremely huge figure, of course, and we recognize we'll have to fight for them. 240,000 are kids, and 2,161 orphans. I said that. Well, now, military prisoners in Azovstal, if they were in the Foreign Legion, you know that there is a case of 2 Brits and 1 Croatian, and there was a US and Moroccan. We do treat them as prisoners of war. They're combatants according to all Geneva Conventions. We're ready to exchange them, but this is the question to Mr. Budanov, coordinator of this headquarters, that he's involved in this. We are only maintaining the register, and we do have the names of all of the foreigners who fight for at the side of Ukraine. They're all combatants and enjoy all the rights and guarantees of protection that our military are being using. Separately on Belarus, citizens, we have no separate information on them. If you have such information, please share with us and we'll bring them into the registry. Hello. I'm from Severodonetsk, Irta radio company. Are there any programs to support the regional media that are also IDPs? We as a media have no funds left for us, but our enemy occupies our frequencies and zombifies the residents who live there. Our colleagues from Donetsk and Lugansk regions have similar problems. Probably there are some joint programs about how to inform the society which will help us as media to survive. Thank you. And right after this press conference, I would ask you to stay behind and share your contacts with my deputy. We have joint projects and we'll rely on you there. And if you have access there and you know how important it is for us to share this information, which is trustworthy and relevant, of course, we'll be grateful for your support. As to funding, yes, we do have a program for 2022, which is being approved, but the funding is available but hasn't been opened in the Treasury office. Well, my deputy Anatolii Stelmakh will explain it some more to you. We have a program which is called Information Sovereignty. Last month we had funds allocated and your Irta company has received it. This month we also have a small allocation, about 20 million, and we have applied the with the Treasury Department, with the support of the Ministry of Finance. You'll receive this funding. Irta, is it on the list? Well, we will be running the procedure on buying their content, and Irta, like last year, will get on this shortlist, of course. Miss Iryna, you said that more than 1,500 Ukrainian civilians are in Russian prisons. What's the mechanism to bring them back home, and how many you've already brought home? We managed to bring home 103 persons. Only during those exchanges that we, 14 in total, which we conducted in the last 3 months, March, April and May. I'm no longer involved in the exchange. Probably the concept will change, but for the time being, while I was coordinating the coordination headquarters, we refused to conduct exchanges of military prisoners if the lists of those for exchange would not have at least some civilians, and of them some women. And in those 14 exchanges that we conducted, we managed to liberate 103 people. 103 civilians were brought back home because of those exchanges. Now I know that there were exchanges of civilians. You've seen that. Some of them were brought back home, not a large number, but still brought back home. And this is a huge problem because there is no mechanism of bringing them back physically, formally actually. Pushing through Geneva Conventions is impossible because there's no format to exchange the civilians. The Russians kidnap them as terrorists, just to keep them and to trade with their lives. And we immediately explained to them it's impossible. And we are grateful, by the way, to all of those who helped to liberate paramedic Tyra. I was not instrumental and involved in this, but it was done, and she was brought back home. So there is some mechanism. We just need... There might be different, diverse mechanisms, and a separate mechanism will work in particular case. For instance, we learned about the cases when people independently try to liberate themselves, and it's happening. There are instances when volunteers help, so life prevails, and it's quite obvious that options might be different. But as to the formal path, we are pressurizing the International Committee on Red Cross. By the way, this is the Red Cross that asked Russia at some point of time to give the list of the civilians who are imprisoned in the Russian Federation. And they did provide us with this list, right, Roman? 120 people. Russia acknowledged that they are being kept as prisoners and who are civilians. They stated no women there, but it's not true. There are 120 civilians whom Russia has acknowledged. Now, we are together. We'll have to focus our attention on Russia acknowledging that they have other civilians there and bring them to Ukraine in whatever way they consider to be possible. But the Geneva Conventions disallow any exchange of civilians. What the Ukrainians should do who had to stay at the temporarily occupied territories, but they want to leave? Is there a mechanism for them to leave those territories? Are they being allowed to come to this territory? Do the occupiers close all the loopholes? No, there are still some ways out here open. 1548, that's the hotline, and 1648. If you want to leave and you are lacking documents because you need to have an ID and you need to be helped with that, if you want to leave and you are lacking funds for the tickets, please call us 1548. This is the number of our ministry, where we 24/7 answer such calls. From March the 17th, when our two hotlines, 1548 and 1648, were launched into operation, we received 120,000 calls. Sometimes you have to wait for a while, right? But sorry, that's what's happening. So many people are calling us. We have 100 volunteers who are operators of 1648 and 16 operators at the other hotlines. So 100 plus operators, and we operate 24/7. So many questions, and we still, by the way, we analyzed that 97% of calls to the hotline came from the temporarily occupied territories, about what should you do if their relatives were forcefully taken from Kharkiv, Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporizhia, the neighboring villages, regions to the border with our neighbors. So 1548, 1648, through volunteers, through consulate office, coming to us saying we need help. We have come up with a mechanism how consulate officers will be helping us to identify such people, and we promise to provide practical support with bringing them back. We are coming up with the routes through Latvia, because you know that people are trailing those, blazing those trails with volunteers, with organizations of our allies, Baltic states, Poland, UK. So we are trying to bring from the crossing points in the Russian Federation to get free of charge to the first place in Latvia. That's still a problem, and we're aware of all of those practical challenges, and we try to resolve them slowly but surely. So if you're aware of those people, come to us. Thank you. Your question, please.
I want to ask you, how many civilians are there inside the Azot plant in Severodonetsk, and is it possible for them to evacuate? Do the authorities offer them some help? And also, is the situation so difficult? Are there some similarities with Mariupol and Azovstal? Thank you.
Ні, я не бачу.
No, I don't see any similarities. They're just two plants, yeah, that's true, and they were built back in the Soviet Union times, which means that they have reinforced constructions allowing to withstand the blast from shells and rockets. But Azot is not Azovstal. They don't have similar to Azovstal underground bomb shelters. So Azot is a chemical company, and people there are being under threat. We have called our enemies and asked them, could we use the Jubilee Bridge, which at that time has not been destroyed, to bring our people to Lysychansk across that bridge? But that's never happened. You've seen the responses, schizophrenic answers from our enemy on our requests, and well, the situation has constantly been changing, but right now there are about 300 people there. But there is an outstanding question as well. We have certain conditions to open the humanitarian corridor, involve Red Cross, involve UN and international organizations, but the first precondition is free will of people. We cannot force people to evacuate. We cannot force them to do anything. Of course, the occupiers are doing that, you know, that they do whatever they can, coerce people, force people to do something, but we can do that only and when people have free will, like it was at Azovstal. As soon as people, civilians, addressed us and said, we want to leave, we started dealing with it straight away. In this particular case, back to your question, I am aware that there is a small number of people there who want to leave Azot plants. And it's important for international organizations and for myself personally, that it's not going to be viewed as something that we are trying to force them out. No, I don't want any misinterpretation here. And the military people promised to me that they will make brief videos with those people, that it was their voluntary desire. And if it happens so, then we'll keep trying to get a corridor in Azot plan. But the situation is extremely difficult there. The civilian population suffers there a lot. Natalia Kambarova, Black Sea TV radio station. For Russia, kids in this war became some sort of a weapon. So in the occupied south, kids could be in dire straits because they were born and then they were given the birth certificate from pseudo administrations. They can only flee through Crimea, if it's Kherson region, and then into third countries. So but what should you do if Russia is doing everything to steal our kids, and there are no documents for those documents, even those pseudo-occupational documents? So probably you know what could be done, and will advise it to Kherson residents. Yeah, thank you for this very relevant question. Well, first of all, I am aware that the occupiers are scaring the local residents that they will be held liable for violating some laws. No, they are not violating any Ukrainian laws if they would flee through temporarily occupied Crimea, because right now it's probably the only humanitarian corridor, well, it's not official humanitarian corridor, but the only corridor available that you can take to flee. So if you have this opportunity, and it should be available, especially those with kids, young families, please leave through Crimea as soon as you can get to the territory of the third country, European Union or any other. Then go to the consulate's office or call us. even without any documents, Poland will allow you in, all the other countries will allow you in. If need be, we will prepare the documents for you and send to the consulate office where you are. So, even without any documents, even with the fake documents that the enemy hands it out to you, that doesn't mean, because these were the documents that were handed out under coercion, and people will not be held liable for this, because if those documents allow a person to leave and save themselves, well, good for them, more power to them. Save your little kids. Nobody will be punishing you. Just go straight to us. We will help you next. So people, if you hear me, and I hope that you do hear me out, please do that. Make the step and leave from there, because our army will definitely be deoccupying those territories. Our will to do that could not be shaken. And it will be extremely, extremely difficult to open a humanitarian corridor later on when the kids are there. I know how difficult it was in Mariupol, and in Kherson it will be even more difficult, because the enemy also learns from its mistakes and becomes more cynical. Like you said, they use kids as live shields, and so we'll be powerless knowing that the kids are there, and we don't want this to happen. Believe me, the occupation will happen soon enough, as soon as the Western weapons come to us, and they're coming more and more to us, and we are able to launch counter-attack. We'll launch it. Kherson is Ukraine, and your resilient resistance that you are doing, resisting, and good for you. Keep resisting, but the life of kids and women is first and foremost. So if you can leave, please do. Missing persons. So what would be your advice? I mean, I'm talking about the civilians now. So what should their relatives do in this case? When we publish this algorithm, we'll paste it on all our websites. Actually, we have the draft guidelines, 2 pages long, an algorithm, easy to understand, user-friendly. We'll print it out and start sharing it. So, Andrew, go back to you. Well, first of all, I would like to tell you that we have both civilians who are missing and military, but most requests coming to us is about the missing military, and for the time being we have no accurate figures on the missing civilians. But anyway, the relatives of those who are missing, you need to file the application with the national police about a missing person. That's first thing. Then the police will suggest to you that you give us your DNA sample, so that if we find a body, we'll be able to identify them. So it needs to be done. And 1648 hotline and 1548 hotline is where we will be working with them. And there's also the hotline of the Office of the President to collect the information about the missing persons and start the case by searching for those people. But first you need to contribute important data about those people. Thank you. Further questions? Yeah, thank you, Iryna. Radio Liberty, Oksana Bachai. My question is about what you just mentioned, that the Red Cross has access to all of the prisoners of war, meet with them, see how they're doing. But we talk to the parents of the those Ukrainian paratroopers who were arrested at the Snake Islands, and they claim that there is no way to get to those people and learn what are the conditions where they say. By the way, how many of those paratroopers have been imprisoned by the Russians, and could we expect that those people will come back home to Ukraine soon enough? When I mentioned to you that the Red Cross has access to prisoners of war, I meant that we, Ukraine, provided them to this access, but not in Russia, of course. It's an open secret. We informed about this for so long that the Red Cross should be more categorical in exercising its international mandate. It's the only one who has the right to guarantee that any side of the conflict will allow Red Cross to come and see and meet with the prisoners of war. Here in Ukraine, we are following all of the international laws, including humanitarian laws, but Russia is not doing it, and they're doing it in such a systematic manner that we're tired to constantly raise it up. But you're right, the International Red Cross has no access at the territory of Russia to most of those camps for the prisoners of war and those remand prisons that we're aware of, because we write official letters and we demand that to come to a particular prison and double check, but it's not happening. We recognize that the time flies. We don't know what conditions those people are staying there. We can only imagine how inhumane they might be, and unfortunately there is no mechanism. Today, for instance, we had a commissioner on human rights of the European Union, and I was telling him about this, that the international humanitarian law doesn't work. The mechanism for bringing to justice those who are not following the Geneva Conventions, well, that's it. Russia violates those, and then what? Nothing. And that's how it's happening now. The world is helpless in the face of barbarism and cynical attitude of Russia, which could care less about international laws and regulations. As to Snake Island, 75. Mr. Oleksandr, he is the holder of our register. 75 of bodyguards, but what about Marines? Their relatives say that there are about 80 of them. Well, 75 persons from Snake Island. If they claim that it's 80, let them contact us and we'll probably learn some more. As to the exchange, you know, every time one or two defenders of Snake Island were taken by us back to Ukraine, but now you need to ask Mr. Budanov, the new coordinator of the headquarters. By the way, this headquarters on the protection of deported Ukrainians. Do you know how many Ukrainians have been deported to Russia? Do you know some figure? And what are the ways to save those people? Does your headquarters cooperate with international organizations on this? And if yes, we work with International Migration Organization, with the Red Cross, with UNICEF when it comes to about kids. All of the international organizations who have their offices in Russia, we work with all of them. In addition to Ministry of Foreign Affairs, when we agree that with them that there should be a third country that will agree to perform the function of a consulate office, even though we haven't reached this arrangement just yet. As to deported people, 1.2 million. I already mentioned this figure, and I only can hope that we'll bring all of them home, at least the predominant majority of them. I have explained it before to people who asked us, well, you have helped people to be saved from Azovstal, and there were people who wanted to flee to Russia. And I always say, we're not against this. If people believe that the territory of Russia is safer for their health and lives, well, go for it. But we are against what's happening when Ukrainians who don't want to do this and who say that they don't want to be brought to Russia, but they are forced to go there. They bring them to filtration camps, and some fail to pass through filtration camps. That's the blatant violation, and this is a crime we need to talk about. If somebody wants to flee to Russia and believes that the humanitarian corridor for that is safer for them, fine. It's okay with us, but we want the Russians to stop using humanitarian corridors. Last question. Hello. Iryna Svetina. From Russian history, from the history of Russian times, we know that those who coming back from imprisonment, they would be then sent to 10 to 15 years in prison in the Soviet Union. But what's the fate expecting Ukrainian military, who either are still in prison there or managed to flee and become jailbirds? Well, yeah, it just reminded me that in the Soviet Union times, those who were imprisoned, the prisoners of war in Soviet Union, were treated as traitors. But we're a human country, and we clearly recognize that those who got into the prison, they were forced to get there. There were certain circumstances that happened before, and I don't want to assess and evaluate those. There are relevant authorities who should qualify all that, but no persecution, well, let alone civilians. I mean, when we save people, we stay in touch with them, help them with psychological rehabilitation, and I'm grateful to the governments of Poland who helped those who came back from the prison, and there are funds allocated who will help each one of those who came back from prison. And actually, when I was helping with exchanges, I always told them, you are our near and dear, you are our citizens. Never listen to the enemy who says that you will be somehow humiliated or prosecuted here. This is impossible, because we heard about the 31st Brigade. I can't even I can't tell you what happened there. I've never been there, and I can't know the details. Like thousands and millions of Ukrainians, we have no presumption of guilt. Presumption of innocence is what we're going to be using in terms of the prisoners. Thank you, Iryna, answering for almost all of the questions in the studio. Thank you. That was Iryna Vereshchuk. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the hero.